All right, looks like we're live on YouTube again. Thank you everyone for your patience. Just wanted to make sure we've got our quorum back. We have Michelle, Jim, myself, and Loyal. Can you just turn on your camera for a sec? Or give us a thumbs up. There he is. Okay, thanks, Loyal. Okay, thank you, everybody. I wanted to make a motion. We feel that further discussion of this agenda item is not efficient use of our time, and that we would like to see a presentation given in the format that Paul Radley sent on December 7th. We can ask that either the license holder give that presentation on the January 11th HCP meeting, or else we will schedule this agenda item for a later HCP meeting ESRC meeting, and the HCP staff will give the presentation following that format.
We can prepare a presentation for you.
Good. Okay, if that was a motion, I'll second it.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Can we take a vote?
I think they verbally have to hear us.
Yes.
Okay.
Aye.
Yes.
Yes.
Aye.
Yes, Bishop. Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you. Matt, did you want to respond?
Yeah, we can prepare a presentation for you. I question how much specificity we're obligated to comply with in preparing presentations, and I do understand the need for you guys to get something in a consistent format, but we'll do whatever we can to comply with this request. I don't want to be unduly burdened is my only concern.
I appreciate
it.
Yeah, it's also important in terms of being able to get the public who are also viewing this to be able to join in on that discussion and to see the overview rather than having to digest the entire report.
Yeah, I apologize. I thought, it'd be more beneficial to get your recommendations on the report also. And, we have a presentation we can give to you guys. So if you guys want to do it that way, that's fine. And I still hope you guys can give valuable recommendations for our plan. And, the focus, the goal I would like is to hear your recommendations. And, that's ultimately the goal of this meeting, I guess.
Right.
Yeah, I will second what George says, is that the intent of not coming with a presentation was to have a discussion, was so that we could get your input. And, you guys as the experts on the ESRC, I would hope that we could learn, like you said, we have similar concerns about take levels, and we want to proceed with our mitigation implementation. It's just, so we face hurdles, and we're hoping to get input on overcoming and implementing, having a successful HCP.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Sorry, Jim.
Oh, I was going to say, as an example, I mean, for the previous project discussion, it was very useful to have the structure that they presented, that they had in their presentation, which allowed us to sort of work our way through the issues. And even though we had the full report as a whole, but then that allowed it to focus on certain of those topics and or bullets that were presented. It just, that structure allows for a better discussion altogether, rather than just opening the door for any questions that come up. So I appreciate you taking the time to do that. And again, we're all in this together. We're trying to help figure out how to deal with some of these challenges that have come up.
Just in the interest of time, I think we're in agreement now. So thank you, Matt and George. We really appreciate that. I wanted to see if we're at 12 o'clock now. We still have a lot of agenda items. Do we want to take a lunch break now? And if so, how long? So we can try and get through as many of these as we can today. Or do you want to keep going?
I'd like at least a short lunch break.
Is half an hour okay for everyone?
Yes.
Yeah, half an hour work for me.
Okay,
Wait,
thanks.
I have-
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm gonna have to break for a little bit. I'm gonna ask Emma to come in at the end of the lunch break, just in case there's a gap between when we return and when I can be back.
Great, thanks, Michelle.
Can
So
we-
we'll adjourn
make it-
for lunch.
can we-
Oh,
Can we make it until about 12:40 or so?
Yep,
I've got to go to another location.
yep, makes sense. We'll come back at 12:40.
Great.
Thanks, Lainey.
All right,
Thanks.
Same-
Mina,
and
do
keep
you
on
want
the
to?
same-
Do
same
you have a
channel?
screen to says like for the YouTube stream that says like lunch break?
Yes.
Or
Yeah, I'll
Back at
share it.
awesome, thank you. All right, see you everyone at 12:40. Hi, everyone. If there's any ESRC committee members, can you turn your cameras on? Can the ESRC members turn on their cameras, please? I've got Loyal. I saw Jim. And then we have Emma Goslinger for Fish and Wildlife Service, who's filling in for Michelle. Hi, Emma. Do we have Jim or Bob for USGS?
I'm on. I'm trying to get my video to go.
Okay, no worries. Thanks, Jim. And then just if there's any anyone else, any adults in the room with any ESRC members, can you just let us know? Yeah.
No one else here.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hey, Emma, welcome back.
Good to see you, Emma.
My wife's in the room. She's going to be working from another desk.
Okay, thanks, Loyal. All right. In the interest of time, I think we should move on. Mina, can you introduce the next agenda item for us, please?
Yes, Jennifer Taylor and Tom Snetzinger from Tetra Tech will be presenting a status of the Kahuku Wind Power Habitat Conservation Plan located on Oahu. Jenny, you're already co-host, so you should be able to share a screen.
Okay, thank you. Let me just get this set up. Okay. Is everybody able to see my screen?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Again, I am Jenny Taylor with Tetra Tech, and my colleague Tom Snetzinger and I will be presenting on Kahuku. And from Brookfield, again, we have Scott Rotman and John Kirby as well. I will be presenting on the Kahuku Wind Power Habitat Conservation Plan as it's been implemented from July 1, 2021 to September 30th, 2022. And again, apologies, similar to the KWPs, we just didn't have enough time to get the Q2 data analyzed in the meeting timeframe. So I will go over the project background, take authorization, monitoring summary, summary of take mitigation, and our agency coordination and adaptive management in this reporting period. Let's see, there we go. So the project background for Kahuku is that, as Mirna identified, this project is on Oahu. Kahuku Wind Power LLC is the owner and operator, and Brookfield Renewable is the parent company, and there's been no ownership change in the past year. The project comprises 12 2.5 megawatt Clipper Liberty turbines, and it's operating under an ITL based on a habitat conservation plan approved in 2010. So incidental take license ITL 10 for a 20-year permit. And this project also was the first permitted on Oahu and operates under a BO, an incidental take statement under U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service purview. And post-construction monitoring, I'll mention, started prior to the project being fully operational. It started 3 months prior to the operation date, and there have been no major or minor amendments to the HCP for Kahuku. The project layout and site is shown here. So it is on the north shore of Oahu, just outside of the town of Kahuku. And the footprint is a circular footprint with an O&M building in the north, along with a meteorological tower. For the HCP authorizes take of 8 species. So there are 8 HCP covered species, 7 of which are federally protected and 1 of which has state level protections. So the pueo is state level protections. So we have grouped them into the Hawaiian hoary bat and the pueo, and then seabirds, and then water birds. So I'll mention this again, but to date, there's only been take of the Hawaiian hoary bat, and we are in tier 2. And for the rest of the species, we are in tier 1 and have had no take. Our post-construction monitoring search strategy is that we are conducting weekly canine searches. At this site, we have a 35-meter radius search plot. This strategy began in April of 2015 and has continued to the present. We run bias correction trials. We have a vegetation management program to manage the grass within the search plot. So we have a regularly scheduled mowing that occurs immediately after a search has occurred. And that in the wet season is 2 to 3 times per month, and then drops down to about monthly in the drier periods. And we also have a scavenger control program that includes a twice monthly trapping effort with a network of traps throughout the site and reporting consistently with agency protocols. At Kahuku, we have an acoustic monitoring program in place also at 4 ground-based detectors, and this monitoring happens year-round as well. So results within this reporting period. So for bat surrogates, we are testing 2 size classes here, our bat surrogates and then medium birds, which represent all of the other covered species. So we have strong searcher efficiency for each of these size classes. And in FY 2022, we also increased our level of predator control on site, and that was in response to probability of persistence that had dropped in response to a decrease in that effort. So in late FY 2021, based on very high carcass persistence, we dropped our effort and then saw numbers come down, and then reinstated the twice monthly program. And we can see that the result here is that persistence, well, we believe there's a correlation, that probability of persistence has increased in Q1. And strong numbers for our medium birds. So that brings us to a summary of take to date. As I mentioned earlier, we've only had take of the Hawaiian hoary bat for as far as covered species go. And cumulative take to date includes 7 Hawaiian hoary bats, the most recent of which was occurred in Q1 of FY 2023. So this September 22, 2020, sorry. Yeah, so I'm getting my FYs and my years confused. September 22, 2022, which is Q1 of FY 23, has been the most recent bat take. Previous to that, we had take on August 18th of 2021. So Based on this modeling, this is our direct take that feeds into our evidence of absence modeling. And so when we use the 80% upper credibility limit of that evidence of absence and include indirect take, we are currently modeling at 18 Hawaiian hoary bats, which puts us into tier 2. As far as MBTA protected species, we have had take of 4 individuals from 4 species. So great frigate bird and white-tailed tropic bird. These happened in Q1 of FY 2022, and then the wedge-tailed shearwater and house finch happened during FY 2022. Our acoustic monitoring program for FY 2022 shows results through June. And we have very low detection rates in all years of monitoring, and that was also supported by the FY 2022 data. Acoustic activity was detected on 2.1% of the detector nights sampled. This was higher than in FY 2021, but not statistically significantly so. And the pattern that we observed this year was similar to years past, with the highest activity in the lactation, post-lactation period. And I'll note here, we did have an increase in February of activity, but that increase is based on one single night of detection in February. And we're seeing it here because the detection rates in general are so low. And at Kahuku, the detection rates across all monitoring years appear to be stable. There's no significant increasing or decreasing trend, and that hasn't changed over the variation of sampling effort that's changed over the years. And so I'll pause here for any questions about the monitoring outcomes of FY 2022. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Okay, I'll go on, and if I missed a question, please feel free to interrupt me. So this brings us to the mitigation status of each of the covered species. So for the Hawaiian hoary bat, we have completed the tier 1 mitigation, and tier 1 funding included funding for 2,500 meters of ungulate fencing at the Kahiki Nui Forest Reserve on Maui. And tier 2 is in progress. We are currently working with the agencies on our mitigation plan. I'll talk more about that in a minute. We are responding to the 3rd round of reviews. So we have spent the last year and a half drafting and revising the bat mitigation plan for tier 2. I believe we moved into tier 2 earlier this year. And so we have had agency concurrence to begin baseline monitoring in 2023 at the mitigation area, which I'll present in just a minute. The full mitigation obligation for each of the other covered species has been met, and that the specific details are in annual reports starting in the FY 2019 annual report. And so I will show them here on the screen, but move through them kind of quickly because they are also available in annual reports. So as I mentioned earlier, mitigation has been completed for each of the other species that are covered by the HCP. So that brings us to our tier 2 mitigation plan. As I mentioned earlier, the plan is under development in coordination with the agencies, and we're currently responding to the agency review of the third draft. Due to the relatively low level of take identified in tier 2, so 8 bats, and the relatively short time frame left in the ITP and the ITL terms, which is 7 years, we've been targeting a mitigation program that restores and enhances bat habitat in a relatively short time frame. And so the goal is to fund management actions beneficial to bats at one of DOFA Oahu's recent bat mitigation property acquisitions on Oahu, which is the Helimanu section of the Ava Forest Reserve. So we've been working with DOFA Oahu on identifying both actions and areas within this larger section that we could focus on. So we've identified 2 parcels outlined here in orangish yellow of heavily disturbed former plantation lands currently used for grazing. And we are calling these parcels the Helimanu Mitigation Area, or HMA. And so within the HMA, there are opportunities to perform habitat modification that are likely to achieve the required benefits for bats, which is the goal of the mitigation program. Again, achieving benefits for the 8 bats of tier 2. So Brookfield has drafted the tier 2 mitigation plan, and the actions that we've identified and that we've been in discussion with DOFA Oahu on are additive and complementary to their broader management goals for these lands. And DOFA Oahu has already executed some forest management actions in this area that are intended to be beneficial for bats. And so we have worked their actions into our baseline, so that understanding that our baseline actually includes some of their actions is an important part of our mitigation plan. So we're building on those actions and also accounting for any benefits that they might have in our baseline. So our plan, this slide is showing a summary of the management actions in our plan, which we've been actively engaged with the agencies on. So we have 3 categories of mitigation actions, 2 that are direct and 1 that are indirect. And so the 2 that are direct are livestock grazing management within those areas of that, within the HMA mitigation areas that I just showed previously. And then the other direct impact is creating and maintaining foraging habitat for bats by creating bat lanes. And then additionally, in working with DOFA Oahu, we identified the inclusion of a water feature primarily for fire suppression. And this would be the indirect benefit, where we would have a mechanism to protect bat habitat from the potential for destructive wildfire disturbance. So mitigation actions actually entail maintaining the existing bat foraging corridors that DOFA has already created and promoting additional bat prey resources through these areas by cattle grazing and management activities within the corridors, like including mechanical vegetation removal as necessary. And we will be creating also additional bat foraging corridors in areas where DOFA did not clear. So that will be additive to DOFA's cleared areas, which will be captured. DOFA's actions will be captured in the baseline, and our actions will be captured in looking at our success criteria and meeting our success criteria. So in terms of the mitigation plan, and moving into the next topic, which is agency coordination and adaptive management, we have primarily been working with agencies in the past year on the Hawaiian hoary bat mitigation plan. So we've had many coordination meetings to date, 4 in particular, which the dates are listed here. And then for adaptive management, we also have the low wind speed curtailment program in place, and it is applied at wind speeds up to 5 meters per second. And it exists from April to November. And this window was expanded from the original timeframe to include all observed fatalities, and also currently includes virtually all measured bat activity that we see on the site, that window of activity. And I would also mention that the project has not had any take outside of this window. And our future plans involve our tier 2 mitigation plan. So we are looking for agency concurrence. And as far as implementing the plan, potentially ahead of agency concurrence, agencies have said that we can go ahead and begin our baseline monitoring so that we are not caught in lag time of concurrence. And this is especially important based on the limited time frame of the permit term. So then additionally, we will be doing the standard suite of HCP compliance and monitoring, including post-construction monitoring for fatalities, bat acoustic monitoring, and reporting in compliance with the HCP and permits. So I will open it up to questions.
So I've got 2 questions. This is Jim. How are you monitoring changes in prey availability relative to the cattle grazing management that you proposed?
We will do insect monitoring and look at both the diversity of species and the biomass of species. So an increase of both of those items.
Is that using techniques similar to what was done previously that Bob Peck and Marcus Gorson and others have done through our program, or something else?
Yes, I believe it is similar to the program that USGS has had in place.
And you'll be comparing that with areas that don't have cattle grazing in it. Is that correct, in the forest?
We'll be comparing it to our baseline. So cattle are available to go throughout the 2 areas that I showed you. And we'll be comparing it to the baseline data that we collect. There are some cattle on site, and we are hoping to work with the licensee, I should say, to potentially increase the number of cattle. And additionally increase where the cattle are able to graze because of the additional bat lanes cut into the invasive forest.
And my other question is about your tier 2 management plan, mitigation plan, excuse me. Is that, I mean, you're saying it's once it's finalized by the agencies, I mean, is that going to come at all to the ESRC for us to take a look at? And maybe that's a question for both you and the agencies. I mean, I'm trying to think of what our role is, because it certainly has things that we could potentially provide input on.
Yes, we have been working with the agencies, and we have been deferring to DOFA regarding the ESRC's role in that plan's development.
Yeah, Jim, let me look into that and get back to you. That because that's the same question you had previously. So if you don't mind, I'll get back to you on that one.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Mina, do we have any questions from the public?
No questions or comments.
Thanks.
Okay, well, that's the end of our presentation. So again, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, I appreciate you putting that presentation together. It's very helpful.
Sure
Thank
thing.
you.
Thanks, Jenny.
Okay, and now we have Tom Snetzinger. He will be presenting the status of the Napuamakani Wind Energy Project Habitat Conservation Plan on Oahu. Tom, I'm gonna give you host permissions and you can share screen.
Great. Thank you, Myrna.
Okay. You should be good to go.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you. So as Myrna said, my name is Tom Snetzinger. I'm a senior biologist with Tetra Tech, and I'm presenting on behalf of Napuamakani Power Partners, the sort of summary of HCP implementation at the Napuamakani Wind Farm for FY 2022. And prepared this PowerPoint that sort of follows the DOFA's topic list that they wanted us to cover. We'll be covering the project background, take authorization, summary of take, monitoring overview, the mitigation overview, coordination with the agencies, and adaptive management and future plans. So touching on project background, the Napuamakani facility is on the north shore of Oahu, adjacent to the Kahuku Wind Project. And I will, in terms of like providing estimates and sort of observed MBTA fatalities, that sort of thing, I'll be including the full operational life of the project, as well as FY 2022 through December 31st, 2022. So the project background, there are 8 Vestas V136 turbines. 4 of these have bat deterrents on them. 4 of the turbines are on private ownership, and 4 turbines are on DLNR ownership. Commercial operation began December 2020, and there's a 21-year permit term that expires April 29th, 2040 for the ITL. There is an amendment in process. We have a draft submitted for an amendment that addresses adding Hawaiian petrel as a covered species and addresses the change in Hawaiian goose risk of the project. So you can see the Napuamakani facility here adjacent to the Kahuku facility up near the town of Kahuku on the north shore of Oahu. And this is the Kawailoa wind facility. As I said, the project is split between 2 ownerships. The DLNR ownership on the west side is primarily undeveloped land. And on the east side, we have private ownership, and this is a mixed agricultural use area with turbines interspersed among the active agricultural areas. 8 turbines, it can be confusing because of the numbering. So we have turbines 1 through 4 on the west side and turbines 6 through 9 on the east side. It was originally designed as an up to 9 turbine project, and that turbine 5 was removed in the final design. So we have 8 turbines, but they go up to turbine 9. And the deterrents that I referenced are positioned on turbines 2 through 4 on the west side here and turbine 6. And those I will discuss in more detail later on, but the location of those were selected based on perceived risk, proximity to forest edge, and gulch habitats. We also do acoustic monitoring, and we have 4 acoustic monitors distributed at turbine 1, turbine 4, turbine 6, and turbine 9, capturing a range of conditions at the project from terrain to land use, that sort of thing. For take authorization, we have 8 covered species. The Hawaiian hoary bat is the only species that has tiers. There's a tier 1 at 34 bats and a tier 2 that adds another 50% potential take up to 51 bats. That is the only species for which we've had observed take. The other remaining species are the pueo, covered under the ITL. 1 species of seabird, the Newell shearwater, covered under both the ITP and ITL. 4 species of Hawaiian waterbirds, covered under both permits. And finally, the Hawaiian goose, which was added because of a population that appeared to be establishing itself on Oahu when we were developing the HCP, but shortly after the approval of the HCP, that population was extirpated. So we have mitigation plans for all of the other species, and we are addressing this condition of changed risk for Hawaiian goose in the HCP amendment, as well as adding the second seabird, the Hawaiian petrel, to add to the covered species list. In terms of a summary of take, as I said, the Hawaiian hoary bat is in tier 1. We've had 1 observed take that occurred September 22nd, 2021, so in FY 2022. And the total observed take through December of 2022, that is through Q2 of FY 2023, is that same 1 individual. Estimated take at this point, which includes analysis through evidence of absence at the 80% upper credible limit, is 3 adults plus 1 indirect take, which is really just a fractional amount that's rounded up to account for that final fatality. For MBTA covered species, observed fatalities for FY 2022 include 4 different species: wedge-tailed shearwater, red-tailed tropic bird, cattle egret, and housefinch. And these are the totals from the start of operations, or the start of, actually before commercial operations, the start of our, essentially from construction through the end of December 2022. So housefinch has been the most numerous, followed by cattle egret, and then we have Pacific golden plover, red-tailed tropic bird, the 1 Hawaiian petrel, that is the significant impetus for moving to add that species to the covered species list, and 3 wedge-tailed shearwaters. So in terms of the project monitoring, the overall monitoring strategy is to do weekly searches with K9 search teams in 2 plot types. As you saw in the figure from the overview of the project, we have sort of this deal in our ownership, and then we have these mixed use agricultural areas. So we have cleared areas around the turbines that we can search relatively easily and consistently with the way that searches are performed at other HCP covered projects where vegetation is managed, and we can easily move around the turbine and find fatalities. But in consultation with Dauphin Fish and Wildlife Service, it became clear that they also wanted us to cover as much of the agricultural areas as is possible as well. So we've added searches in those agricultural areas that are done in the same way as the primary areas, but we can't control the vegetation and we can't sort of affect the ability of the farmers to produce their crops. So we're navigating this closely with the agencies and working to maximize the detectability of fatalities within both of these areas. The vegetation management that we do within those cleared areas around the turbines consists of is essentially follows immediately upon the search. So the vegetation management crews go out after the search in order to minimize any risk of a fatality being destroyed by the vegetation management process, and that is done weekly following the searches. We do scavenger control. We have 100 traps distributed across the project area and check those every other week. We do bias correction trials by plot type. So in terms of plot type, I'm referring to the cleared areas around the turbine versus the active agricultural areas. So we measure searcher efficiency and carcass persistence independently in those two areas so that we are really assessing the likelihood of a carcass persisting and being found within areas that are frankly quite different from one another. And then finally, we do reporting consistent with the agency protocols. I wanted to talk a bit about the sort of search constraints that we have to address at this project, which are distinct from other projects. We have on the west side of the project, so these are those 4 turbines on DLNR, and we just clip them out. They're not this close to the private ownership parcel, but and this yellow highlighted area is steep slopes. So these are areas above 15% grade that really can't be managed for vegetation effectively. And as you can see, the west side of the project, that DLNR ownership, is significantly impacted by those steep grades, as well as even this southernmost turbine on the private ownership. When we get up into these areas on private ownership, land use control is a significant issue for us. We have limited ability to work to affect how the farmers want to manage their lands and what they do on them. These areas up here, and I'll talk about those a little bit in a little bit more detail, but these are areas where we have tenant farmers with loose dogs that impede us from being able to do safe searches with our canine search teams in those areas. In the green areas, we've added all of these agricultural areas to our searches and do them as we can safely. And we do analyze the data in evidence of absence from searches that are performed in all of these areas. We also have the issue within these areas of being able to trap safely for scavengers. So and I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail as well, but within the area around the turbines themselves, we're able to pretty effectively control scavengers and have a high probability of carcass persistence and searcher efficiency in these areas, partly because the areas are removed from the area of project control, which is around these turbines, but also because there's just more cover. These areas have lower carcass persistence times. And so we continue to work with the agencies to try to work through that, but there are limits in our ability to effectively trap scavengers out of those areas. And really maximize the probability of persistence in the way that would most benefit our analysis. So challenges within the agricultural areas that I've described, carcass persistence. As I said, we're working with the agencies to try to approach that in a way that works statistically, so that we're incorporating good measures of carcass persistence that we're accounting within the areas that we are searching. Another challenge has been that crop areas that we are searching obviously are going through rotations and growing cycles, and some of those crops, there are certain periods where we can't effectively search them without damaging the crops. So we have been searching areas when we can, when they are sensitive and we can't search them without damaging them. We may step away for a quarter or a search period or two and then come back. But evidence of absence does allow us to prescribe, I forget the term now, but novel search intervals. So we can provide a specific custom search interval that describes when we searched it and come up with statistically robust estimates for the addition of these areas. Ultimately, what we do is we combine in the evidence of absence multi-class analysis all of the information from the turbine search areas as well as these agricultural areas and come up with an overall estimate of take. And then the final topic that I just wanted to touch on was, again, associated with safety in searching these areas, and that's chemical use. So fertilizers and pesticides that might be applied can risk the safety of the canine search team. So when those are being applied, we have to step aside and make sure that we can then enter those areas safely. So that again may require us not to search a specific agricultural plot, which might be something like the size of this green area here on a particular search, and then we would renew the search the following week. So touching on sort of those bias correction results that I was sort of framing in that last slide, we have really high searcher efficiency, whether it's in the agricultural areas. So what we have here is bats and birds, the managed vegetation. So these are the areas around the turbines, and then the agricultural areas. As I said, we do these trials independently, and we began them after we had an additional canine search team trained up and ready to start implementing these additional searches, and they began in June 2022. So regardless of whether it was birds or bats, searcher efficiency and agricultural areas or managed vegetation areas, searcher efficiency was super high across the board. Where we see the difference is that carcass persistence drops when we move into the agricultural areas. And as I said, the additional cover, increased distance from the area where we are able to do trapping, these are probably factors affecting these carcass persistence times and driving them a bit lower than we're seeing in the managed areas. The project has a number of avoidance and minimization measures. So we do low wind speed curtailment for wind speeds less than 5 meters per second. That curtailment is applied from March through November. As I said earlier, we have deterrents on 4 turbines. Those became operational in September 2020 prior to commercial operation. As I noted, they were selected based on proximity to edge habitat, so forest edge, as well as the gulch habitat. And as part of the ITL, there is a requirement for a deterrent research program that was not written into the HCP, but it was a special condition within the ITL that the Board of Land and Natural Resources added. We have a draft of that plan in agency review and have worked closely with DOFA in consultation to develop a plan that met their goals. We do acoustic monitoring, as I said, at 4 turbines, 2 on the DLNR side and 2 on the private ownership. And those were selected to and intended to capture a range of conditions. The effectiveness of the deterrent program is to be evaluated in that research plan that I referenced. The single observed bat fatality that we had did occur at turbine 6, which has a deterrent and was operating under low wind speed curtailment at the time. Looking at results from the Hawaiian Bat acoustic monitoring program. So as a reminder, these are 4, based on 4 acoustic detectors distributed around the project. We see patterns similar to what has been observed at other projects, and quite similar to what has been what was shared earlier today from Kahuku, with sort of a fall, August to October increase in activity. Still a low activity though, something like 15% or less of detector nights occurring during that period, and then dropping down to virtually nothing. I think, we're looking at 5% detector nights perhaps in April and May, but really from December through June, very low activity. And I also want to highlight that this activity, proportion of nights with detections is, whether you have 1 night or 1 detection in a night or 15 detections in a night, it's still coming out with that is one night with a detection. And most of these detections, even in the higher levels, are reflecting just a couple of detections on nights with activity, so relatively low. It is interesting to see, however, that we are seeing differences among turbines, and I think this will become hopefully a more robust understanding as we accumulate data over time. But this is turbine 6 here, this dark gray peak, and this would have sort of roughly been the period of time when the fatality was observed. So significantly higher acoustic activity during the period where we did observe that that fatality. And then at the low end, turbine 9, this is the northernmost turbine on the private ownership. And both turbine 1 and 4, which are the southern and northern turbines on the public ownership, on DLNR ownership, show sort of a middle of the road activity level. As part of general monitoring, the HCP also committed to doing annual surveys for Chromalina. That's devilweed within the project area. Our survey from this current fiscal year occurred in November 2022, and we still observe presence of the species at within search areas on turbine 3, 4, 6, and 7. So that's both on private as well as DLNR ownership, and reflected not much of a change from 2021. We're continuing to follow OISC recommendations in terms of removal and management. We do have, well, I guess to start, in consultation with OISC, it is clear that chromalina was well established in the area prior to the construction of the project. We do hand removal and spraying outside of the search areas, but within the search areas, we're working to ensure that we can protect the safety of the dogs. Right now, at this point, we are managing through cleaning of dogs and boots following searches within areas that have devilweed, and we are exploring additional control methods that can be compatible with safety concerns by our canine search teams. Moving on to, well, maybe I'll go back here and just pause before I move into mitigation. Are there any questions anybody has? Yeah, Jim.
Yeah. Several questions I've got. If you don't mind, if you can go back to your post-monitoring table.
The search efficiency and carcass persistence.
Yes, right. Yeah, with the exception of the ag areas, I mean, the numbers are pretty good. Well, no, as far as the CEF, but that really reflects only the areas that you're able to search, which is just a small portion of the potential impact or potential areas that you could find carcasses in. Is that correct?
So I think our estimates right now for the bat surrogates, we're covering 71% of the carcass distribution, and I think it's at 37% for birds.
Well, the reason I realize that there's some real challenges with the steep terrain and so forth, and that's why I wonder if you've considered trying to come up with any other kind of monitoring. I mean, it's excellent that you've only had one observed bat fatality, but is it potentially that you just haven't detected more of them because of that? And there have been some really pretty good advances in the thermal imaging and also the target identification software for that, and it might be worthwhile to consider at least on a trial basis to look at some of that in some of your more challenging areas to see whether anything would help understand more whether it truly is that you're not getting much in terms of impacts of bats.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, the challenge here, and I think, is when I look at the acoustic activity data, and I recognize that's not counting, all of the bats, but I think we have to understand it as, it's probably reflective of something in terms of the number of bats that are present, and trying to capture thermal imagery when we have extremely low sample sizes I think I just have to question whether that's really going to pay off. I think we feel good about, that we're able to cover over 70% of the carcass distribution for bats. And I think that, gives us and these high carcass persistence and primarily the search efficiency, but, even carcass persistence is quite high. I think that all gives us some reasonable confidence, especially as we measure these out over time. So I know, in 1 year of PCMM monitoring, we may not get the answer, but over multiple years and repeated sort of sampling of that, I think that we do get a pretty good handle on what the actual fatalities are.
Yeah, no, I think that's a valid point. That being said, is I mean, as you indicated, that acoustic monitoring gives you some index, but we're not really clear in terms of how good that is. It's been documented that in some cases you're probably getting maybe 25% of the bats activity in an area, and so the thermal imaging may help in terms of both validating, in terms of that being the acoustic being a good index, a consistent index, but also to get at whether any potential bad interactions with blades might be detected. And I realize it's your numbers are so low, it really is a challenge, and I know that's been a problem. But anyway, I put that out as being something to consider, and if nothing else, as being part of a research thing, and particularly if you merge that with the deterrence research program in terms of looking at how well deterrents are working, and it would be potentially much more valuable information to have thermal imaging as being one of the means to look at the effectiveness of the deterrence by looking at bad activity around the turbines with and without deterrence. And so that's just something else to consider. So you can almost combine the two of those together, potentially into something, at least in a research mode.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the input.
Yeah, and then I guess the other question is too, and this you get back, and I'll be a broken record again, Lainey, in terms of the deterrent research plan. Is that a thing which potentially would be coming to the ESRC before it gets finalized and implemented? So.
Yeah, no, just in reference to that, we have asked that question of DOFA if they want us to bring that forward to the ESRC, or what their process is for sort of approval of that. It's in the special condition in the ITL. It references parts of the HCP. It's not really clear how they envisioned that process would carry out. So we've asked for input on that from DOFA.
Okay, well, I don't ask that question from a regulatory or approval standpoint. It really is more in terms of being able to provide input in from the expertise that's brought forward by the ESRC. So that's why I bring it up.
No, understood. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
Can you go back? Sorry, can you go back to the slide with the search area?
This one?
Yeah. I know you said there's a lot of like physical limitations on search areas, but I'm concerned that the efficiency trials were sort of biased towards areas that were easily searched. So in the further out you go, the less efficient it's going to be. Is there any way to increase these search areas? We've
looked closely at it, and we've maximized what we think can be done. The areas so in terms of search efficiency trials, we are testing the entire area, so random distribution of carcass locations, and that includes within the agricultural areas. So they're randomly distributed within these for search efficiency trials within the agricultural areas and within the managed vegetation. So you will find trial carcasses that are placed right out at the edge of the search areas or next to the turbine, and it's it given the amount of sampling that we do, I think we're very confident that search efficiency is extremely high in all of the areas that we're searching and analyzing, using for our evidence of absence analysis. Certainly there are, areas of windbreaks or trees that can't be cleared, and those areas would have lower search efficiency, but they're not feeding into the evidence of absence analysis. So we're not saying that they're at an area that's being searched and searched better than what we're estimating. We're just saying we're not searching it, so the carcasses that would have occurred in there have no potential for being detected. And the theoretical background for that is that those then would, if you were to have somebody report a carcass within a tree line that wasn't being searched, that would be a carcass that is accounted for through the scaling from the evidence of absence. So evidence of absence is looking at the probability of search efficiency, but also how much of the area you searched. If you didn't search an area, you found a carcass in it, the increase in the result from evidence of absence over what you observed includes not only the carcasses that could have occurred within search areas that would have been lost because the carcasses didn't persist or not observed because the search area missed them, but also includes the accounting for the areas that you didn't search. So it scales up according to what we call the DWP, the density weighted proportion of the carcass distribution that is being searched.
Okay, so you are taking into account the search area, the non-search areas, because obviously you're not going to find a carcass in an area you didn't search.
Correct. Yeah, all of that is accounted for in evidence of absence. Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on to the mitigation. So the bat mitigation area for the project is the Polomoho Ridge mitigation area in the Ava Forest Reserve. Consists of mid to high elevation forest shown here and a zoomed in section here. And this was outlined in the original habitat conservation plan. Basically, the goal was to address threats to bat habitat, including feral ungulates and invasive plant species. The area was, prior to the completion of the HCP and recognized as a part of it, the area was fenced by DLNR and is protected, but that fencing requires continued maintenance and monitoring to make sure that it stays intact. The figure here with zoomed in sort of shows you the relative infestation by invasive plants. The green dots represent mule's foot fern, so obviously widely spread throughout and in some areas very dense. We also have areas of strawberry guava and manuka here. So this, sort of gives you a vision of some of the impacts that are occurring in the area. It's currently managed by the Ko'olau Mountain Watershed Partnership, and we're working with them to get approval for this mitigation plan and begin implementing it. So the overall mitigation status for Tier 1 is we are working with the agencies toward that approval. We have revised plans of both a research component and a management component that are in agency review. We're hopeful that this will put us in a place in the very near future, and this is specifically described in the HCP, but where we would come to the ESRC for additional input and hopefully resolving any final questions and moving forward with it. But overall, the framework for the mitigation plan was described in the HCP. So I think you have an idea about what's included in it. Following that initial approval of the HCP and in our discussions with DOFA and Fish and Wildlife Service, we did understand from the agencies that they wanted clearer connections showing the benefits to the Hawaiian hoary bat. I'll describe that, but the key sort of foundation of it are, one, maintaining the feral ungulate exclosure, and if feral ungulates, primarily pigs, were to get inside, that those would be removed. reducing invasive plant impacts. Through that and increasing plant species richness in areas that are heavily impacted by those invasive species, we expect to see an increase in availability of bat prey, and this would be measured. And finally, we're tying that also to measures of increase in bat acoustic activity that should sort of connect changes in plants to a more robust native ecosystem, to increases in availability of bat prey, to measures of increase in bat acoustic activity. So touching on the deterrent study, the ITL specified a $100,000 deterrent study that was required as a special condition in that ITL. As I said, this is a draft is in agency review right now. We expressed this in our discussion with DOFA, but we view them as it is a condition in the ITL and not the ITP as the lead agency, but we have provided this document to Fish and Wildlife Service as well for their input. Essentially, what we're looking at is an experimental deterrent effectiveness study. We view this as, because of small sample sizes, this is going to have to be a long-term study. We would look at habitat and land use correlation to bat activity and risk, and test differences between the control and treatment. So we've identified they were not randomly selected, the control and treatment turbines. As I said, our goal in deploying those deterrents was targeting areas that we thought were more risky to bats, because we want to maximize the minimization and the understanding and testing of effectiveness of deterrence is lower in priority than actually minimizing risk. So the deterrent study itself, sorry about that, includes deterrence on 4 turbines, acoustic monitoring at all turbines. Right now we have 4 turbines with acoustic monitors. We would add acoustic monitoring capability at all of the remaining turbines. We would have turbine-specific land use and habitat data, analysis and reporting, and we would incorporate data from fatality monitoring at all of the turbines. And our goals are really to improve understanding of risk at the project and inform decisions regarding additional deterrents. So we see this as a potential driver for adding additional deterrents if we determine that there remains risk at these other turbines and that this would further reduce that risk, and giving both the agencies and Nippon-Makani information to make those decisions on. Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, question. Your second bullet under goals. What specific data or analysis results would lead you to the decision to add additional deterrents, or to decide that the deterrents are not working at all?
So I think it would be a combination of things. We would be primarily using acoustic activity as a surrogate or as an assessment of risk. So we would be looking at that in terms of how that is distributed both among the turbines that are have deterrents and don't have deterrents. So looking, and we would in theory be able to correlate that with potentially land use, but probably more likely habitat types. So edge of forest, edge of gulch, connecting those dots. The site really does have a diversity of conditions available to sort of tease apart some of these things. What we, the problem that we're facing though remains the same as small sample size. So PCMM work, getting a 1, getting a 2 fatalities, per turbine is really challenging to understand that as a significant piece of information. So we need more dense information, and that we can get that from the acoustic data. I think one of, and I'll reference here the thermal imagery data, but I don't view that as something that is going to add sort of that significant additional sort of observations that get us to risk versus no risk, or assessing that risk. I think what we would expect to see from thermal imagery data is a few anecdotal observations, frankly, that aren't going to add a lot to this. So this, I think our understanding and in our conversations with DOFA, what we understood, the goal from BLNR is partly sort of feeding into that decision. It's like, can we or should we require that projects install deterrence? And we view this as a way of, particularly if we're adding that denser information from acoustic monitoring results, of saying, okay, these turbines do look riskier. We are seeing, maybe we're not seeing a significant decrease in risk at the turbines with deterrence, but we are seeing a difference, and that may be enough to drive Nippon-Makani to say, okay, it is worth it at this point to install deterrence on the remaining turbines or these remaining turbines and continue this investigation. So, I don't think that we will get there in a year. I don't think we'll get there in 2 years, but I'm hoping over 3-4 years that we can have enough information to help inform those decisions.
Okay, well, thanks. It's a real challenge with the type of data that are being collected in the small sample size, both in terms of bat fatalities and a number of towers that you've got. We do have quite a bit of information with the research that USGS has conducted that I think could provide input into that. So we're looking forward to having the opportunity to review that draft plan, and possibly we could add some thoughts on to how you might approach it.
Great, thanks, Bob.
Yeah, I was just going to make a similar comment, actually, that there's a lot of nuance to deterrence in terms of, especially with assumptions about the correct frequency. And you've got a 60 megahertz range of acoustic frequencies used by bats. And there's some interpopulation differences as well. And so a deterrent that hits the full range on one island might not hit the full range on another island. So there's a lot of hypotheses to be tested there. And the result you get might be based on the way you set it up in terms of your deterrent range, rather than whether deterrents as a whole are effective. So yeah, there is a fair amount of island-specific data on acoustic ranges used by the bats that could feed into such a plan to make it more tailored to the site.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think, we do have the benefit here of working with NRGs. So this is, the same acoustic deterrent setup that is on Kaweloa. It's designed differently because the turbines are different. So for example, we have 6 deterrent units deployed on each turbine compared to 5 at Kaweloa, but it is the same system. And because at Kaweloa, they have measured significant benefits, we think it makes sense to, sort of continue using that. As I said, I think we're in that position of, if we want to understand the effectiveness of deterrence on the Hawaiian horny bat, Nippon-Makani is not the appropriate site. I mean, that sample size is, there's not enough turbines, and there's not enough activity to justify that as a site selection. But I think DLNR wanted information about relevant to the permitting of this particular project, and that it makes sense based on discussion with DOFA to implement the study at the project. And this seems to us to be an appropriate way of both minimizing the risk while still collecting valuable information.
One other quick follow-up question. I don't think this is proprietary necessarily, but can you give a ballpark figure in terms of what it costs to deploy a deterrent? Not only just the cost of it, but how to manage it. So I'm just trying to get an idea of what the fiscal decision might be that would lead, that would restrict or lead you to go in that direction.
I don't know off the top of my head. I would have to discuss, but it's something I can try to share back through DOFA staff with the ESRC members to try to.
No, that would be useful. Again, it just to sort of, because I have no clue in terms of what it is, and if you're talking $2,000 versus $100,000, I mean, it's a different kind of a financial decision that would relate to how important it is to get this kind of information to do a go or no go on it.
Yeah, understood. Lainey, did you have a question?
It's actually just a response to Jim's earlier questions, that we are planning, after agency review, we are planning to present the mitigation plans to the ESRC for their recommendations.
Any other questions on bat mitigation? So moving on to a couple of other species. So for the pueo, funding was provided to DOFA's Endangered Species Trust Fund, and we provide a report, a preliminary report of the project that was funded with that money. It was a breeding ecology study on Oahu, and as I said, preliminary results, and we would expect additional reporting on that, I'm guessing in this coming year's annual report. For Newell's Shearwater, funding was provided to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and we heard from Fish and Wildlife Service that there are plans to use the funds to partially support a larger project on Kauai. We didn't get a specific timeline for that though. For Hawaiian waterbirds, the mitigation area is the Hamakua Marsh. This is an area that was proposed for the original Habitat Conservation Plan mitigation effort. It is a state-owned DLNR waterbird sanctuary and has breeding habitat for Hawaiian waterbirds. For this site, or for this suite of species, adaptive management was necessary. Because of changes in the project or at the Hamakua Marsh area that addressed the threats that the original mitigation plan was planning to address. So because those threats were no longer there, it was agreed by both DOFA and Fish and Wildlife Service that adaptive management was appropriate and that we could stick with the Hamakua Marsh area. We have received agency comments on a revised plan, and based on feedback, we anticipate that we'll be able to begin work in the fall of 2023. Essentially, the work is similar to work that was performed for the Kahuku wind project quite a number of years ago, but it involves predator control, habitat management, monitoring, and we would expect anticipated offset from that mitigation plan over baselines. This is a new baseline that would be established based on the most recent, I think, 5 years of activity, and so offset from baseline in approximately 2 years. So regarding Nene mitigation, I've already touched on this, but Fish and Wildlife Service and DOFA recommended keeping Nene as a covered species, although the population has been extirpated. They wanted to protect against the possibility that the species could return to Oahu. In discussing this with them, neither agency has plans on taking any action that would increase the probability of that occurring, essentially of translocating Nene in such a way that them settling back on Oahu would be a likely scenario. But they did recommend that we keep Nene as a covered species. Agencies recognize there's no current risk to Nene and that it's unlikely to be at risk. So the HCP amendment lays out is provisions for flexibility in identifying a mitigation project if Nene return and are at risk. But if they do not return and are never at risk from the project, both agencies agreed that no mitigation would be required. So regarding agency coordination and adaptive management, already stated for the Hawaiian hoary bat, the deterrent study is in review, and we do have deterrents deployed and are working with the agencies for approval, and obviously we'll coordinate with DOFA and the ESRC to get final approval for that. Habitat management and research at the Paumohu management area. Again, consultation with the agencies on the draft plan and revised plans in review. Again, we expect that we'd be bringing that forward to the ESRC. I'm hoping this spring so we can get off the ground and begin the actual on the ground mitigation. For water birds, we need a little additional consultation with the agencies on the draft plan, but based on input from DOFA, we anticipate approval with minor edits and implementation starting in the fall of 2023. For Hawaiian goose, as I said, we're addressing this through the major amendment and PCMM work. So it's post-construction mortality monitoring. We're continuing to engage with the agencies and work through these ongoing challenges, ranging from steep terrain to working effectively in the agricultural areas. For future plans, just sort of regarding general implementation, we will continue the post-construction mortality monitoring and update that based on any future agency coordination. Bat acoustic monitoring, we plan to continue that and supplement it upon approval of the deterrent study plan, at least as it's currently configured. Invasive plant species monitoring will continue on an annual basis, and our reporting will remain in compliance with our associated HCP and permits. So we expect for the bat mitigation and deterrent research to work towards review and approval of the plans and implementing those plans. For the water bird mitigation plan, again, finalizing agency approval and implementing the plan. We expect in the fall of this year. PCMM, continuing that work and agency engagement and implement any changes or updates to that. And finally, with the HCP amendment, continue our coordination with the agencies, receive input on the submitted draft, and consult with DOFA and Fish and Wildlife Service regarding the environmental review procedures for that document. And with that, I will pause for questions.
Thanks, Tom. I had more of a comment than a question. You mentioned the Nifwef seabird funds. I think I may have misheard, but I think you said that was being done in consultation with Fish and Wildlife Service. I was wondering if you could also include DOFAR in that review of how those funds are spent.
So we aren't in control of those funds. I would have to look at the HCP to see what it says regarding DOFA's participation in that process, but that's sort of out of our control. But certainly, we certainly would not have any objection to DOFA participating in that, but that's sort of out of our sphere of influence.
Okay, no worries. We can follow up internally. Thanks.
Sure. Any other questions?
Sure, Tom. In reference to that question that Lainey had, were you talking Fish and Wildlife Service or Fish and Wildlife Foundation?
It's the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, but we've regularly coordinated through Fish and Wildlife Service, so asked for updates through them and received that. So I don't know enough to say sort of exactly how Fish and Wildlife Service and the foundation work together. I sort of suspect that they're in contact with the foundation and acting as a conduit for information to us. But I don't know if Emma or Michelle, if you've returned, if you have any input on that.
No, thank you. I personally have not worked with them, but I know that we have contacts in our office that we reach out to. But I think that shouldn't be a problem to pass information on to DOFA.
Thanks, Emma.
So I don't know, are there any questions from the public if the committee members don't have any?
No questions or comments from the public.
Actually, I had another question about Kahuku. If Jenny is still on, I'm not. Oh, there she is. That's okay. If we're finished with Napua Makani, that is. Sure. Yeah, I had a quick question about. I believe there's a blade replacement planned. Do you have any thoughts on, if that's going to be, what the potential impacts of that is on take, given that I think the blades are much larger than new blades?
Yes, the equipment replacement that has been discussed comes as a result of the clipper turbines that are no longer manufactured, and therefore the maintenance and reliability to meet the PPA agreements through the end of the permit term have become issues. And so we have been in discussion with agencies on equipment replacement. And one important thing that comes from this is the opportunity to reduce risk to bats through deterrent installation. And so the actual turbine specifications, I believe, are not in excess of 10-meter difference, although I do need to look that up and be certain about that. So we can follow up on that. So they're not substantially larger. So I just want to exercise some caution when we say, how we qualify larger. And because the clipper turbines did not allow for any deterrent replacement, NRG wasn't able to work with those turbines. This allows an opportunity that we didn't have previously to manage risk to bats at the site. So this was first discussed with agencies in 2019, but put on hold, and the agencies were supportive then. Again, it's a slight increase in the maximum blade tip height, but we would address that increase by looking at increasing the search area to maintain the basically proportion of the carcass distribution that we are currently searching now, so that the search area would be expanded in proportion to maintain that proportion of the carcass distribution that is already currently being searched.
Okay, thank you. All right. There, I think, just want to check if there's no other questions from the committee or the public.
Nothing from the public.
Okay, thanks, Mina. How are you? How's everyone going? Are you going to go on to the next agenda? We have a pretty full agenda. We want to get through as many of these as we can.
So this was the last item agenda for today.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah. The other ones are for Wednesday.
Oh, okay. Then shall we take a quick break and then go on to the last agenda item?
No, that was Napuma Committee was the last one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, I misunderstood. Oh, okay. Then I guess we can adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
I second that. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thanks to everybody for the presentations. It was very useful, and appreciate you taking the time to put them together.
So, Lainey, we should probably get the 4 members to agree to adjourn.
Yeah. Do we
I
have?
just want to add a quick question just to clarify. You guys still want me to present with that agenda? You guys going to update the agenda for Wednesday, correct?
Yes. Yeah, we've adjourned that agenda item and we'll carry that on Wednesday.
Do you know when I will be put into that agenda?
Mina, do you want to? Should we put that on first or last? Do you have an, or do you want to get back? Should we get back to him on that?
Well, if George, are you okay with being the first to present?
Yeah, that should be fine.
Okay, then yeah, I have no problem with that.
Okay. Thanks. All right. Move to adjourn.
Doyle, did you have some other questions?
No, I didn't. I just was trying to make sure we voted.
Yay.
Okay, I say aye.
Jim seconded it already.
Yep.
All in favor?
All right.
Yes. Well, bye.
All right. Thanks everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.